Continue. So before lunch, we were talking about, we had just seen, we saw the definition of zero knowledge, the zero knowledge property. And zero knowledge, the term zero knowledge proof is basically any interactive proof that satisfies the completeness, soundness, and zero knowledge properties. Okay. And by the way, this is not the final property, zero knowledge property we'll end up with. We'll see some better definitions as well as we go along. We saw that the protocol we discussed for graph isomorphism in the beginning is satisfies this property. There's zero knowledge as well. And there were a couple of other good questions after that I wanted to discuss as well. So one of them is one way to think about that. One way that I find it convenient to think about zero knowledge is as a property that is intended to provide some security for the prover, right? Because among other things, it implies that if the prover has some kind of secret that it is using to run the protocol, that is using to participate in the protocol, then zero knowledge implies that that secret is not revealed to the verifier. Right? It implies something much stronger than that. It implies that nothing at all is revealed to the verifier, but it also specifically implies that any secret that the prover has is not revealed to the verifier. And if, in fact, if that is all you care about, you can even weaken the definition of zero knowledge. I'm not going to go into that now, but you can weaken the definition of zero knowledge to protect any specific piece of information that the prover has, if it has any specific information it wants to protect. But the zero knowledge, as we have written it down, is a much more general property. It says nothing at all is revealed to the verifier. Not just this specific string is not revealed or this specific bit is not revealed, but nothing is revealed, right? So it's a very strong kind of property. And the other question is something I have forgotten, so it will come back to me later, and I'll tell you what it is. Okay, and now what I want to do now is I want to show you a different protocol for a related problem that, and the reason I want to show it to you is these two approaches, this protocol and the one I'm going to show you, they capture these two different paradigms of designing zero knowledge protocols that are quite widely useful. These are not the only ways of designing zero knowledge protocols, but these approaches are quite useful, and we'll see how some of these become useful in other contexts later today as well. And the protocol I want to show you is for the graph isomorphism problem, right, where the prover is trying to prove that two graphs are isomorphic. So as we saw right at the beginning, it's very simple to prove that two graphs are isomorphic. You can just give me the relabeling that witnesses the isomorphism, right? So it's very easy. But the issue with that proof is that it is not zero knowledge at all, right? It reveals everything about there is to know about the isomorphism. It reveals a lot of information. So the question is, can you design a proof that is in fact zero knowledge and proves that two graphs are isomorphic? Now this again, I don't know how to do it with a non-interactive proof, but again there is a simple protocol, the simple interactive protocol that can in fact do this for graph isomorphism. Any ideas about how you would do that? So let's say I'm the prover, right? I have these two graphs, and I want to prove to you that they are isomorphic, right? But I don't want to reveal to you what the isomorphism is. So how might you? Yeah, any ideas? What do you mean? Oh, you're saying just change the, here you're saying here you reject and here you would accept. Right, so that's a good thing to try, but and this is actually a good thing to ask right now, a good thing to go into at the moment, because it doesn't work, but it doesn't work for not interesting reasons, but the fact that it doesn't work highlights something that is important to keep in mind, which is that let's think about what would happen, right? Let's say you said that's what you wanted to do. Let's say here you just say this, instead of this I just reject, and instead of this you accept, right? Then now let's think about the completeness and soundness properties. What does completeness say? Completeness says that if the graphs are isomorphic, then the verifier should accept with some large probability. But let's see what the probability is that the verifier will accept, right? So to make the verifier accept, in this case the B prime has to be not equal to B, right? And the prover can, if they are isomorphic, that will only happen in probability half, right? But that's not a problem already. Like that's okay. If as long as in the soundness case the acceptance probability is even smaller, it would be fine. But let's see what happens there. So for completeness, we have said with probability half the verifier can be made to accept, but not more than that. But for soundness, what is happening is there are two graphs, they are not isomorphic, and now the prover gets this H, right? It knows exactly what B is by our arguments for completeness in the previous protocol. It knows exactly what B is, so it can always make the verifier accept by just sending B prime not equal to B, right? So it doesn't work, and the reason just the simple flipping of the final condition is not working is because completeness and soundness are not symmetric properties, right? Which you can see just by the way we have written them. With soundness, we have this quantification over every possible algorithm of the prover, but for completeness, we don't have that, right? And this makes them not symmetric, and that's why something like this will not work, because a prover that deviates from this protocol may be able to do things that a prover who does not deviate cannot do. Like here, you can imagine that if you kept the prover algorithm the same, right? If you did not change this algorithm, then you do in fact have the properties that you sort of want. Like if you just said, if you kept this property the same, kept the prover the same, and you change this algorithm, then in fact if the graphs are isomorphic, you accept with probability half. If they're not isomorphic, you accept with probability 0, right? So for the honest prover, it works. Changing the condition of accepting works, but if you're dealing with the dishonest prover, it doesn't work anymore, right? This is something to keep in mind, that the soundness guarantee and completeness they're not symmetric. This is somewhat different from if you're just thinking about algorithms. Like if you say that whether an algorithm that decides a language, you can in fact flip the output to decide the complement of the language, right? That works with algorithms, but it doesn't work with these proof systems, right? Yeah. Oh, if the two of them are not isomorphic, then H reveals what B is, because only one, it will be isomorphic to only one of them. Any other ideas? How can we possibly, so I want to prove to you that these two graphs are isomorphic. Is there any other way I can do it? Forget even about the zero knowledge property, right? Is there any way I can do it where I'm not fully revealing to you what the isomorphism is? And one property that is going to be useful here is that isomorphism is a transitive property. Yeah, so this is another thing you could try, right? So let's try to expand on this a bit more. The observation that we want to build things on is that if G0 and G1 are isomorphic to each other, then any H that is isomorphic to one of them is also isomorphic to the other, right? So one other way, like one thing I can do to it doesn't make sense from the point of view of an actual. If you don't care about zero knowledge, maybe it doesn't make sense to look at a protocol like this. But one thing you could do is I could give you a graph H. So I'm the prover, okay? I have G0 and G1, and I claim they're isomorphic. So one thing I could do is I can come up with some graph H that is isomorphic to one of them, and if both of them are isomorphic, it will be isomorphic to both of them. And then I will have an isomorphism. So we are starting with G0 and G1, right? Now imagine if they are isomorphic, I'm going to pick some H that is isomorphic to one. It will also be isomorphic to the other, right? And I am a computationally unbounded prover, let's say. So in fact, I actually don't need to be, but let's say I am. Then I can figure out the isomorphism between these two, which I could also have been told by somebody. And now if I generate a H whose isomorphism I also know, right? Because I take this and I do a particular relabeling of that. I do, let's say, a random relabeling of G0 to get my H over here. Now, knowing this relabeling, so this over here, let's call this some R hat, okay? R hat is the relabeling that takes G0 to G1, let's say, okay? And let's say that R0 is a relabeling that takes G0 to H, right? And now I have these two statements. I have R0 inverse of H is equal to G, and if I go back to G and apply R hat, that gives me G1, right? So R hat composed with R0 inverse of H is G0, this is G1, right? So if I know both of these relabelings, then I actually know the relabelings that take H to G0 and the relabeling that takes H to G1, right? And this can only happen, like I can come up with a H and one relabeling that goes to 0 and another relabeling that goes to G1. I can only do this if both these graphs are isomorphic to each other, right? Because if they are not, then if H is isomorphic to one of them, it will not be isomorphic to the other because this property is transitive, right? And so this is something that can happen. I can have this H and these two things only if there is in fact an isomorphism between these two. And this is what I want to use in constructing my zero knowledge proof. So if you did not care about zero knowledge, then one thing I could have done is I could have given you this H and I could have given you both of these isomorphisms, and then you would know that okay, here is a H, here is some graph that is isomorphic to G0 and also isomorphic to G1, and that would prove that the two of them are isomorphic to each other, right? It's a worse proof than the previous proof we had, because the previous proof I just had to give you one relabeling from G0 to G1. Here I am giving you two relabelings, so it's not a great proof. But what you can do now is you can do something else with this, which is that I could give you just one of these relabelings, right? And that would tell you that this H, if I gave you this one, you would know H and G0 are isomorphic. If I gave you this one, you would know H and G1 are isomorphic, right? I could give you just one of them. So if I give you both, you know that both the graphs are isomorphic. Now what I'm going to say is I'm going to send you this H, okay? And I claim that G0 and G1 are both isomorphic to each other, right? If that is the case, then I should have an isomorphism to G0 and an isomorphism to G1. And if you ask me for either of those, I should be able to give you that isomorphism, right? Whereas if this is not the case, if H is isomorphic to only one of G0 or G1, then I will not be able to give you a relabeling that goes to one of those. Like let's say H is isomorphic to G0, but this is not isomorphic to that. Then I send you some H. If you ask me for an isomorphism to G0, I can give it to you because I know it. But if you ask me for an isomorphism to G1, I will not be able to give it to you, right? Because it doesn't exist. And this is what we are going to use, right? And the interesting thing about this protocol is I am giving you only one isomorphism. I'm not giving you both. So if I had given you both, what is the problem? Well, if I gave you both, if I gave you this and this, then you can figure out this R hat, right? Because R hat is this composed with the inverse of this, and inverses you can compute, right? So if I gave you both this and this, then let me give these some names so I can refer to them. R0, let's say this is let's say this. I want better names for these. Okay, let's say this is R0 and R1, and let's say if I gave you both R0 and R1, then you can put these together to get R hat, right? Because I know that R1 is equal to I know that R1 inverse. So this is R1 inverse. I know that R1 inverse is equal to R hat composed with R0 inverse. So this says that R hat is equal to, you compose this R1 inverse composed with R0. Right? Basically, you start here, you apply R0 and you apply R1 inverse and you go back there. Right? So if I give you both R0 and R1, or R0 inverse and R1 inverse, then you can figure out the relabeling that goes from here to there. You can figure out the isomorphism. Right? That is one thing you can learn if I gave you both of these. But if I give you only one, then you cannot learn this. Right? If I give you only one of these, then it's not clear how you can recover R hat from that. And this is what I'm going to do. Okay, so the protocol is going to be, yeah. So that is one of the things we want to prevent the verifier from learning. So zero knowledge means that you cannot learn anything at all. right? And one potential thing you could learn is this relabeling. So we definitely want to prevent that, but in reality we want to prevent the verifier from learning anything. And it turns out that in this case, as we will see, protecting this very carefully ensures that the verifier cannot learn anything else at all. But in general, the way to think about it is not that you are trying to protect any specific piece of information, you are trying to protect all possible pieces of information. But often in very structured problems like this, you often end up observing that if it seems like there is this one particular important piece of structural information that is revealed, often hiding that often makes it the whole thing zero knowledge, because if the protocols are nice enough, often the only thing that will be revealed is that information. Like in this case also, you can sort of argue, and we'll try to come back to this once we have looked at the entire proof of this. In this case also, you can sort of argue that this R hat is the only possible information that is revealed by this protocol. So making sure that is not revealed makes sure that nothing else is revealed. Alright, so I'm going to write down this protocol and then we will talk a bit more about this. Okay, so there is the prover and the verifier, and again there is G0 and G1. So what the prover is going to do is it's going to do basically this. It's going to, let's say, so it knows the, let's say it knows this R hat, right? So, because it is unbounded, it can compute this R hat. So let's say it does that first, or it can also be provided this by some third party. And if it is provided by the third party, the rest of the protocol is actually efficient, we'll say. So it computes the R hat that goes from G0 to G1, right? That witnesses this isomorphism. And then it's going to sample some R0 that is a fully random relabeling. Okay. And it's going to compute the H exactly as we did over there as R0 of G0. And it's going to send this H to the verifier. Okay, so it computed the random H, send it to the verifier. And now the verifier is going to say, okay, if the prover is saying here's an H, it's isomorphic to both G0 and G1, right? So the verifier says, okay, if it's isomorphic to both of them, then give me an isomorphism to this particular one. So, right, so the verifier is going to pick a random bit and tell the prover, okay, give me an isomorphism to the graph GB, right? And then if B is 0, you want to return, let's say, I'm going to call this isomorphism R that is going to return. If B is 0, then it will return R0 itself, and if B is 1, it should return the R1. So R1 is what? To go from here to here, you have to do R hat inverse and then R0. So it's R0 that is composed with R hat inverse. Right? This is the relabeling that goes from G1 to H. So you invert the R hat and then you apply R0. Right. Second. Yeah, you start from G1, R hat inverse will go here and then R0 will go here. So you first apply R hat inverse and then I apply R0. Right, so I will send back, then the prover sends back this R, and then the verifier checks whether if you apply the corresponding R to the graph specified by GB, you get H. Right, so if H is equal to this R applied to GB, you accept. Otherwise you reject. Right? Any questions about the protocol? So the verifier's algorithm is just this. We specified the protocol. This is what the verifier does. The prover may do other things as long as it satisfies the completeness property. Right? So as long as the prover's algorithm and the verifier's algorithm together satisfy the completeness property, and the verifier's algorithm satisfies the soundness property, we are happy.
So the verifier does not know the prover takes a permutation of G0 or G1.
It doesn't need to know. Yeah. In fact, the prover may not be doing. There are other possible prover algorithms that could work. Like it could start by taking G1 and all. So it doesn't really matter. You just need to specify some algorithm here that works, but it could do other things as well. That's fine. Right. And now here, let's see what we can say about this protocol. So first of all, completeness is clear, right? The fact that if G0 and G1 are isomorphic, then this in fact does satisfy all these conditions. Because if they are isomorphic, then the prover can compute the R hat, it can compute the R over here, and it will satisfy this property by the definitions of all of relabelings and everything, right? And the fact that these relabelings can be inverted, right? So is completeness fine? Okay, so the thing to worry about really is soundness, and usually you will find this is the case. The completeness is often, most protocols, not always, but for most protocols, completeness is simple because you only have to talk about the one algorithm, one prover algorithm, right? Whereas with soundness, you need to be able to rule out all algorithms. Okay. Yeah. So now it remains for us to look into the soundness and zero knowledge properties of this protocol. And actually, soundness is also clear, right? How would you argue soundness? So in soundness, what do we have to show? Remember, we have to say that irrespective of what algorithm the prover runs, it cannot make the verifier accept with high probability. So in completeness, if these two are isomorphic, the verifier accepts with probability 1. Right? So that's good. So for soundness, we need to show that if the graphs are not isomorphic, the probability it accepts is smaller than 1, significantly smaller than 1. Right? Yeah.
In this case, the prover just doesn't know the isomorphism and just gets the permutation of one of the graphs, and with half probability he gets the bit that is he said, and then he tries to fool the verifier with probability more than half.
Yeah, this is how we would like to argue it, right? So what is the in the soundness case? Let's go through it a bit more slowly. In the soundness case, what you have is that the graphs are not isomorphic. The graphs are not isomorphic, right? Now the prover can be doing anything it wants in here, right? Because we are not analyzing just this particular algorithm, but any possible algorithm. All you know is that the prover somehow sends you a graph H. You don't know what this H is. The prover may be doing some weird things. Maybe H is not isomorphic to either of G0 or G1. You don't know. It's sending you some H, right? What you need to show is that whatever H, what we can show, in fact, we will show is that whatever H it sends you, the probability that it will then be able to follow up with an R satisfying the properties you're looking for is going to be low, right? So how do we argue that? I want to claim that for any H, I want to make a stronger claim than we actually need. I want to say that for any H that the prover may send, the probability over the B that there exists an R such that R of GB is equal to H, I want to say this is smaller than something. So what can I put here and how can I show? Yeah.
So we can divide in 3 cases. If H is not isomorphic to any of them, G0 or G1, then the probability 0 cannot answer R. If it is isomorphic to G0, then in case the B came 0, it can give correct answer. And if B was 1, it cannot give correct answer because there does not exist any isomorphism. So in that case, it is half. Similarly, for G1.
Yeah, this is basically the argument. So H is either isomorphic to one of them or neither of them because it cannot be isomorphic to both of them, and that's the important observation, right? So yeah, if it's not isomorphic to either of them, this probability is 0. if it is isomorphic to only one of them, the probability is half, because if the B happens to be the one it is isomorphic to, the prover can give you the R, but otherwise it cannot, right? So what you can say is that in any case this is at most half, and the probability it accepts is also bounded by this. This is exactly the acceptance condition, so that gives you the soundness. So that says that if the graphs are not isomorphic, then the probability, what doesn't matter what the prover does, the probability the verifier accepts is at most a half. And as before, you can also amplify this by repeating and so on. Right? Okay, so soundness is also not so bad. Now, how do we talk about the zero knowledge property of this? So how do we discuss the zero knowledge property? How do we show that the protocol is zero knowledge?
In the previous thing, what if for soundness we check it for all malicious provers, right?
Mhm.
So then if if B is 0, then probability is what do we say? Then the probability is 1. Conditioned on B being 0.
Okay.
It gets accepted. And then if B is 1, what if the malicious prover tries to randomly guess the permutation? Then the probability has to be.
But the point is,
It's very small.
so the point is it won't even exist. If the two graphs are not isomorphic,
Oh,
then H is isomorphic to at most one of them. The other thing won't even exist. So it can't do anything. Okay, so now we want to talk about the zero knowledge property of this protocol, right? And the intuition for why it might be zero knowledge is basically what I told you. Like, we have this H which I'm giving to the verifier, and I reveal only one of these two relabelings, but not both of them. So it should not be able to get like a relabeling from this to that. Like that's sort of an intuitive reasoning for why it should not be able to learn this particular information at least. But to show it's zero knowledge, we need to show much more than that, right? We need to show that you can, in fact, if you look at the verifier's view in this protocol, we have to be able to show you can, in fact, simulate this view. So how do we do that? How can we design an efficient simulation algorithm like we did over there? There it was very simple, right? We sampled this B and then it was quite simple there. But how can we design a similar efficient simulation algorithm that can simulate the verifier's view over here?
Sample R naught, and then we could say R naught is equal to G of T.
Say again, you sample, okay, let me write this down here. So the simulator, it gets G0 and G1 and it needs to work in the case where they are isomorphic. So what's the first step?
Sample B, sample R naught.
So it's sample B and you want to sample a random relabeling or not. Okay.
Then we could output H as R naught of GB.
You want to say your H is some R, let me not call it R0 because you may be applying it to either graph, right? So I want to save that notation for something else. So I'm just going to call it R. Okay.
And then R output is equal to generator.
Just put together all of these things. Huh? So essentially the view is just the H, the B and the R. That's all you have to simulate. And you have candidates for all of them. So you could just output that. And now it remains to check that this in fact is the actual view of the verifier in the protocol. Isn't B taking? But the verifier, at least so far, the way we've been talking about things, this bit B is independently chosen at random. That's what we want to simulate right now. It could have been sampled earlier as well. It's being sent after the H is seen, but it's sampled independently of H. Right, but it could be a concern. If it was sampled depending on H, it could be a concern, and we'll get to that in a bit. But for now, we are only thinking of this particular procedure, right, where the prover sends an H, and remember, because the zero knowledge property is only security for the prover, right? So you only care about providing the security if the prover behaves correctly. If the prover follows the protocol correctly, then you have to provide the security. If it doesn't, you don't care, because if it doesn't, you cannot provide guarantee for every possible prover algorithm, right? So you only care about the zero knowledge property when the prover is behaving according to this algorithm. So it's sampling this H in this manner, and then it's and then you see this B, and then the verifier samples this B like that, and then you get this R. So now we have to argue that this distribution is the same as this distribution. In this case, the verifier doesn't even have like secret randomness. Whatever randomness it samples, it's also sending in the protocol, so you don't even have to think about it separately. Right. So this being the case, how can we argue that that distribution is the same as this distribution? Yeah.
So first of all, R is sampled randomly, so it will follow the same distribution.
Okay.
Independent in either cases. So we take it as that. Now since R is generated randomly, so every H.
One second. R is generated randomly here, but it's not.
So it is the first term that is being generated.
So this is R0, but the R that is in the protocol,
Yes.
it depends on the B.
Yeah, there R0 is generated randomly. And for so now when that R is being returned, it is it is half the time R0, and half the time since the R cap inverse is like fixed, so for each like R there exists R0 and some other R which will yield the same R. So in both half of the cases we get, so it's a random distribution over all the permit. Sorry, like
Or all the relabelings.
yes.
Okay.
Relabelings. And now because R is randomly distributed, R0 is randomly distributed, so H is uniformly randomly distributed, and so is the case in R simulation, and similar is the case for B.
So yeah, this is roughly the argument, but let me try to present it a bit differently. That's equivalent to what you said, but
So what if we do this way? We take an instance HPR here and try to show that the probability of it occurring is going to be exactly the same as.
you could do that too. It's writing out the expression is can be a bit annoying, but you can do it. It will also work. But let's see if we can argue this a little bit differently, just in the other direction. Okay, I want to think of it as okay. So we start by remember we only care about zero knowledge when in yes instances, right? So we are starting with G0 and G1 being isomorphic. Okay, now I want to go from here. So first I want to look at the distribution of H. So here the H is a random relabeling of G0, right? Here it's a random relabeling of GB. But if G0 and G1 are isomorphic, then a random relabeling of G0 is the same distribution as a random relabeling of G1. So this H really is the same. H has the same marginal distribution as the H over here. So that's good. That's fine. And this B is also independent of everything else. Even though the B gets involved here, it doesn't really matter because, like we said, G0 and G1 have the same random relabeling distribution. So the B is independent of everything else here. it is also independent of everything else here. So it's also fine. So this B is also, this H and B together, they have the same distribution in both places. And remember, we have used the fact that G0 and G1 are isomorphic. If that was not the case, then we cannot make this argument. If they are not isomorphic, then the distribution of H and B will be dependent on each other. Because if B is 0, H will have one distribution, and if B is 1, it will have a different distribution. But here, because they are isomorphic, irrespective of whether B is 0 or 1, H has the same distribution. Right? So that's very important. So now, if they are isomorphic, this H and B have the same distribution here and over there. And now, conditioned on the H and the B, you can again show that the R is simply going to be uniformly random over all relabelings that map GB to H. There may be more than one, but it's going to be uniformly random over those. And here also you can observe that the same thing happens. And the R that is being sent over here, it requires a little bit of careful argument over here, but everything is very nice and uniform and invertible over here. So so all the argument basically goes through. And you can show that here also, this given the H and the B, the R is basically a uniformly random relabeling conditioned on the fact that the relabeling takes GB to H. And because we are starting with R0 as a random relabeling, and so either of these on their own is a random relabeling, and then you condition on the H, so it becomes like just a random relabeling conditioned on mapping GB to H. I'm not going through this too carefully because it's a bit annoying to do it very carefully, but this is basically the argument, right? So all you need to show is we can just go start with the first marginal for this and slowly start including more and more parts of the transcript and keep showing that they match the same, that they have the same distribution. That's the idea. Okay, so again we have this relatively simple protocol that has the zero knowledge property for graph isomorphism. So we had one for graph non-isomorphism, and now we have one for graph isomorphism as well. And with the difference being that in this case, that if we did not care about the zero knowledge, here we had a protocol, but there we did not have a protocol. But still, here getting zero knowledge is not trivial. You still have to do something to get it. Right. And another thing. Do they have anything else to say about this? And yeah, as I was saying earlier, these are two different paradigms of designing zero knowledge protocols. You will find that in many cases, the kinds of protocols you want to design, the kinds of problems you want to design protocols for, you can often reduce to one or the other of these. Not always, but often you will be able to reduce to some version, not exactly something to do with graph isomorphism or maybe nothing to do with graphs, but this general idea of wanting to show that there are these distributions that are the same or distributions that are different, because in the end that's what it comes down to, right? So in the end, what both these problems of showing non-isomorphism or isomorphism, the way we have constructed these zero knowledge protocols, they go through this intermediate step where we are taking this G0 and G1 and we are looking at random relabelings of that. So we have these so we started with G0 and G1, and then we look at the distribution. These are fixed graphs, right? But then what we do is we look at these random relabelings, and let me distinguish these just to highlight that they are different. So you take a random relabeling of G0, you take a random relabeling of G1, right? Now we started with fixed graphs, and now we get some distributions over graphs. And the key observation here that we were relying on the whole time is, if G0 and G1 are isomorphic, then these two are the same distribution. And if G0 and G1 are not isomorphic, then these are disjoint distributions. The support of these distributions is disjoint. They are very, very different distributions. So we are essentially going through this intermediate question of asking, I give you two distributions specified in some implicit manner maybe, but I am giving you two distributions and I am asking, are they the same distribution or are they very different distributions? And this is what is really enabling us to construct these protocols. And even in general, if you can take, let's say you want to design a zero knowledge protocol for some problem, right? If you can reduce it to something of this form, if you can take any instance of that problem and come up with two distributions such that if you have a yes instance, the distributions are far, and if you have a no instance, the distributions are close. If you can do something like this, all the other way around is also fine. If you can reduce your problem to something like this, then you can use one of these two paradigms to design a zero knowledge protocol for it. Essentially, all you have to do is replace the way this H is being generated. Here it's generated as a random relabeling of GB. In your protocol, it would just be one of the two distributions that you have reduced to. The same thing in the other case as well. Right? So in this sense, these are two very useful paradigms for designing zero knowledge protocols. And we'll see one application of this one later today as well. Right? Yeah, this is one interesting way of looking at what is going on over here. Any questions about any of this? Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to strengthen my definition of zero knowledge a bit. Like when I started out half an hour ago, I was saying that we want to think of this zero knowledge property as this security property for the prover, right? That if the prover has some secret, then it is being hidden by the protocol. The verifier cannot learn this, right? And ideally, you would want this protection to hold even if the verifier is not behaving the way it is supposed to, right? Even if the verifier deviates from the protocol it is supposed to follow, like over here, it's supposed to send a random relabeling of one of the graphs, but it could be sending like a completely different graph, right? If it chooses to not behave according to this protocol, it may be doing other weird things, and that might enable it to learn things that we would not like it to learn. Like actually, this protocol is a good example. Can you see some example of information that the verifier may be able to learn if it is not constrained to follow the algorithm we have written there? What can it do? It can send. In this protocol, so say again, you're thinking about this protocol or the other one? You want to think about this protocol? Yeah, I don't think you can do it in this one. But this one, you can do some things. What can you do? Like what can the verifier do? It will have to deviate from the specification here, because we have already shown that if it follows this algorithm, then the protocol is zero knowledge, right? But can you see something it can do that can reveal to the verifier some information that it cannot have computed on its own? Some non-trivial information. Yeah. It could be anything that it cannot figure out on its own. It knows G0 and G1, but what else?
Instead of sending H, which is a random of GB, it can send any other H and figure out if that H is isomorphic to G.
Yeah, so this is one thing it can do, because if you look at let's say this is the prover algorithm, right? The prover is behaving honestly, let's say, right? So this prover is essentially what it is doing is it is acting as an oracle for testing whether a graph is isomorphic to G0, right? Because you give it some H, it will tell you whether it's isomorphic to G0 or not. That's exactly what this algorithm is doing, right? And now in this case, if the verifier followed this protocol, followed the algorithm we have written down here, then it doesn't learn anything new, because if it generates this H as a random relabeling of G0 or G1, then it already knows whether H is isomorphic to G0 or not, because it knows if G0 and G1 are not isomorphic, and this B was 0, then the verifier knows that H is isomorphic to G0. And if B is 1, it knows the H is not isomorphic to G1 to G0, right? So if it acted honestly, the information that the prover is providing is something that it already knows. But if it doesn't act honestly, it could give an arbitrary H of its own choice, and it will get the information. It will learn whether H is isomorphic to G0 or not.
You could compose, say, the R hat as a series of pairwise switches, and you could query every pairwise switch, and like you could take every pair of nodes, you could switch them and ask if it is actually isomorphic. If it is, you keep that switch and then go to the next pairwise.
So you're trying to recover the isomorphism from G0 to G1. But we are in the case where they are not isomorphic. Right? So in this protocol, we only care about zero knowledge. So we are back in the non-isomorphism setting where the prover is trying to prove the graphs are not isomorphic. So you only care about the zero knowledge property if they are in fact not isomorphic.
Using that case, doesn't the verifier learn H which is isomorphic?
Oh, but the thing is that if G0 and G1 are isomorphic, it can generate H on its own. And in fact, even if it is not, if it has the B, then it can generate H and B on its own anyway. It's the R that's hard to get. Right? But this is the thing it can do, because to repeat, the prover is essentially offering an oracle on isomorphism to G0, and if the verifier runs according to the specification of the protocol, then it only gets information that it already knows. But if it does not, then it may get information it does not know. It may pick like some third graph H and be able to test whether it's isomorphic to G0 or not. So in that sense, if the verifier does not follow the protocol, then it's breaking the zero. It's learning something from the prover, from the interaction, right? And this is something we would like to prevent. And ideally, we would like our definition of zero knowledge to already capture this, right? Because if we are thinking of our zero knowledge property as this kind of protection for the prover, then it should also cover this ideally, right? You would want it to cover this. And so what we are going to do is we are going to extend this definition of zero knowledge to also include this. So rather than saying that, so far we have only talked about the simulator simulating the view when the honest verifier interacts with the prover, right? So I'm going to extend this in the natural way and say that not just is there a simulator for this normal verifier, I want to say that for any efficient verifier, and by efficient I just mean polynomial time. Let me just write that. I want to say that for any polynomial time verifier, there is one as a simulator that simulates its view. For any polynomial time algorithm V star, I want to say there is a simulator that is specific to that V star. It could be different for every possible verifier, but I want for every verifier I want one, right? And here I'm going to ask for this, and I'm going to look at the view of that particular verifier interacting with the honest prover, and I'm going to ask that the simulator simulates that view. Right? So this is the natural extension of the definition to cover the cases where the verifier does not behave according to the protocol. The verifier tries to do something malicious, do something different from the specification to try to learn something from the prover. Right? So if you extended it to this, then you will be capturing those properties as well. And in particular, the example, like what we described over here, the behavior that was possible for the verifier over here, actually tells you that this protocol does not meet this stronger definition. So it satisfies the other weaker definition, but it doesn't satisfy the stronger definition. Right? Because there is a verifier that can learn, like given some H, it can learn whether it's isomorphic to G0, and this is not information that we can efficiently generate. Because graph isomorphism, we do not have a polynomial time algorithm for. If you did, then you can simulate this information. But because it does not, because we don't know how to do it in polynomial time, we cannot design these simulators for arbitrary verifiers in this case. Right? And actually, this definition turns out to be a bit too strong. Like you can sort of show that not only a very restricted set of languages can meet this very strong definition. So people usually relax it a little bit, and the simplest way to relax it is to allow the simulator to sometimes fail. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow the simulator to fail sometimes, and then what I'm going to ask for is when it does not fail, it honestly simulates the view. Right? So I'm going to relax the condition I'm asking. I'm going to relax the definition a little bit, and that makes it much more powerful, much more useful. Because if a definition is too strong that it can never be met, then it's not useful, right? So whenever you're designing a definition, these are two things that are always in conflict. You want to define the strongest kind of security property possible. You want to define the strongest kind of correctness property possible. But if the definition is too strong, then maybe no algorithm meets the definition, in which case it's not useful. Right? Because definitions are only useful if they are non-trivial, if they can actually be met by something that is actually useful to you. So this definition happens to be too strong. It cannot really meet it for non-trivial languages. So we have to relax it a bit. and I'm going to relax it by saying that so I'm going to allow the simulator to fail, and I'm going to denote its failure by saying that it outputs some special symbol saying I have failed. Okay, so it's allowed to give up, but it shouldn't give up too often. Right? So I'm going to say that the probability that the simulator this thing, so it's allowed to fail, but the probability it fails, I want it to be small. And then I'm going to ask for the simulation to work only conditioned on it not failing. So this distribution, instead of saying it's this thing, I'm going to say conditioned on this not failing. So conditioned on not failing, I'm going to ask for this property. So the simulator is still a randomized algorithm. You give it this x, and it has some its internal randomness, and sometimes it will just say I failed. But when it does not fail, its output distribution has to be the same as this distribution.
What exactly does fail?
Failing means, imagine it outputs some special symbol. Like imagine it just throws some exception. Says I cannot run. I have failed at simulating.
Like when would that happen?
So we are going to design the simulator. It's our task when we have a protocol. We want to show the protocol is zero knowledge, right? So for that, what we have to do, we have to say for every possible efficient V star, here is a simulator. We are going to construct that. So we get to define when it fails. So we will design the simulator for every V star, and then we will specify when it fails. And we have to, the condition is we have to make sure that the probability it fails is small. And it can be, it doesn't have to be that small, because this also you can sort of amplify. Like let me say like this is like less than or equal to a half or something. That's good enough, because you can just run it over and over until it doesn't fail. Yeah.
It's kind of similar question, but since we are programming the simulator and we already have the view of the verifier, why can't we just program simulator saying that yeah, that's equivalent to the view of verifier? Like we already know all the details on the right hand side.
So you know the algorithm of the verifier V star. This you know, and you may know what the algorithm of the prover is, but the simulator has to be efficient, so it cannot run the prover.
Oh, efficiency is the reason.
Yeah, exactly. The efficiency is the only problem. Otherwise, you could do it.
Could you tell this one fails the stronger notion without any
So this one, okay. So here, let's say. So I want to rely on the hardness of the graph isomorphism problem. Okay, because if the graph isomorphism problem is easy, then it's trivial to construct a zero knowledge protocol, because you just don't talk to the prover at all, solve it yourself, right? So I can only expect to show that this protocol doesn't work if I believe the problem is hard. If I believe the graph isomorphism problem is hard, right? Now let's say we believe it is hard, all right? Then I want to describe a bad verifier algorithm, like a malicious verifier algorithm that I cannot simulate. That's how you would show that this protocol doesn't meet the condition, right? So let's think about it this way. Let's say, now I want to make a slightly stronger assumption about the graph isomorphism problem. So when I say it's hard, right, what exactly do I mean? Well, typically we think of worst case hardness, where we say that actually maybe I don't even need anything stronger. So typically we think of worst case hardness, where we say that for any polynomial time algorithm, there is some instance on which it will fail, on which it will be wrong, right? That's how we think about hardness of computational problems. I'm going to try to use, I think I'll need a slightly stronger property, unless this is enough. Right? Let me think for a second whether this is already going to be enough for me. No, it won't be enough. I'll need something stronger. Okay, I'll need a slightly stronger kind of hardness for graph isomorphism. Okay, and the kind of hardness I want to use is what is called average case hardness. All right, in this case hardness. So here I'm going to assume that there is it's not just that there exists, not just that for every algorithm there exists an instance on which it fails, but I want the other way around. I want to say that I would like to say that there exists an instance on which all algorithms fail, but that's a bit too ambitious, because if it's just one instance, then the algorithm that always outputs the corresponding answer will succeed on that, right? So I cannot actually say something that strong. Instead, what I'm going to assume is that there is some distribution over instances such that any polynomial time algorithm fails with good probability on that distribution over instances, right? So what I'm going to assume is that in this particular, specialized to this particular problem, I want to assume that there exists some graph G0 and some distribution D over some graphs such that for any polynomial time algorithm, let me call it A, the probability that A is able to correctly determine whether, so H is a distribution over graphs, okay? So I sample H from D and I want to ask, does A correctly determine, so A's job is to determine whether H is isomorphic to G0, okay? That's what A is trying to do, and I'm going to assume that it cannot do that. And this is the kind of hardness I want. So I want to assume that there is some distribution, and this is my hard distribution of hard instances. It's telling you what the difficult instances are. If I sample a random graph from that distribution, then the probability that A of H is correct about whether G0 and H are isomorphic is small, right? It's trivially small. So so what I want to say is, so A takes H as input and outputs either it is isomorphic or it is not isomorphic, and I want to ask the probability that, and I'm going to denote it by this, okay? So this, imagine this is like a Boolean variable that represents whether the two are isomorphic or not. So A takes H and is trying to determine whether the two of them are isomorphic, right? And I want to assume this probability is less than, let's say, half plus little o of 1. It can always be half, because I can always guess if this distribution D is biased towards graphs that are isomorphic to G0, I can say, oh, it's always isomorphic, and I can succeed with probability half, right? So I can always get probability half of success by just randomly guessing, and I want to assume that you cannot do that much better than this. So this is a certain kind of hardness of the graph isomorphism problem. So far I have just been saying that there is no polynomial time algorithm for the graph isomorphism problem. This is a more specific version of that statement. This is a slightly stronger and specific version of the statement, right? And if you believe that this is true, if you believe that there is in fact a J0 and a distribution D, and where distribution D can be efficiently sampled, meaning that there is an algorithm that runs in polynomial time and can sample this, do this thing, right? Suppose you had this, and then using this you can show that using this you can construct a verifier that you cannot simulate, because that's our task. Remember, we are trying to show that this protocol does not satisfy the malicious security property, right? And to do that, our job is to design a bad verifier. It's to design a V star that you cannot construct an efficient simulator for. Right? That's what we're trying to do. And towards that, we are assuming that the graph isomorphism problem is hard in this very specific sense. Okay. And now that we have this, now what can we do? Now, if you have this, how can you realize the intuition I was giving? I was talking about earlier. So the concern that we had is that this verifier may learn some property. It's what do you call it? The verifier may learn whether a graph it wants is isomorphic to G0 or not, right? And that's what I want to that's what I want to use to show that it cannot be simulated. So if I give my imagine the following V star. So this V star, what it does is fix some G0 G1. Okay, that's I guess that are isomorphic to each other. Doesn't matter. So what this V star is going to do is it is going to sample the H from the D. instead of sampling H according to this that it's supposed to do, it's going to do something different from the protocol. It's going to sample H from the distribution that is hard, right? And now it is. Let me write it in that form, in that format. So there is the P, and P is behaving honestly, and there is V star. So V star samples H from D and sends it to this P, and P is going to return a bit, right? And the bit is going to be exactly this. It's going to essentially, it's going to be the complement of that, but that's the information you get. So this P essentially tells you whether G0 is isomorphic to H or not, right? So this verifier, by participating in this protocol, is able to perfectly determine whether a graph from this distribution is isomorphic to G, right? But this is something that you cannot really do with the simulator, right? If the simulator wanted to do this, okay, you actually need a little bit more than this. My argument has to be a little bit, my assumption has to be a bit stronger than this, but some approximation, what does the simulator have to do? The simulator is given G0 and G1. Again, it doesn't matter because we have fixed this G0, G1. It's supposed to come up with a H from this because this H is from this distribution, and it has to come up with this information, right? So it's supposed to simulate some H from D, and the information on whether G0 is isomorphic to H. But this is difficult, right? At least if the approach you are taking to doing this is you get the sample, you get the H and you try to determine this, you cannot do it. Oh, it's because, so here I'm just saying that if somebody else samples a graph and gives it to you, you cannot figure out whether it's isomorphic, right? But the simulator has a bit more power than that because it is coming up with the H on its own. So maybe there is some weird way of sampling H that lets you sample it together with this information. So it can be a bit complicated. So you need something a little bit stronger than that. But that's a detail, okay? Like it's let's not think about that. For the spirit of what I want to say, it doesn't matter. But the idea basically is that now the simulator has to simulate this information, which is hard, which is difficult to compute because the problem is hard. The details of exactly how I am defining average case hardness don't matter that much. What matters is that there is a hard problem there, and the simulator, in order to simulate the protocol correctly, ends up having to solve some hard problem, and that's why it's not able to simulate. And that's the issue. Right? And this protocol on its own, it doesn't make this definition, but you can actually change it to meet it definition, and if we have time, we'll talk about that. For any algorithm that so actually what you really want to say is that you cannot sample both of them together. That will be exactly what the simulator has to do. So it's a little bit different than that, but it doesn't matter that much. It's like for the spirit of what I want to say, it doesn't quite matter. If you're interested, we can talk about this more later. This one, a little up, but that would hide the. So which part are you not able to say? Oh, here I see. So yeah, it sends the graph and it gets back information on whether this is isomorphic to G0 or not. Yeah. Okay, but all that to answer the question of, to give you some idea of why this protocol does not satisfy the stronger zero knowledge property, right? But you can actually transform this protocol. It's a little bit of work, but not too much. You can actually transform this protocol to make it satisfy the stronger zero knowledge property. You have to do a few more things. Maybe I'll just describe it very briefly. So what is missing here, right? Why is this not, again, why is this not zero knowledge? The reason it's not zero knowledge is that the verifier could be sending some arbitrary graph h here, right? And you don't know how to simulate that. So to make it zero knowledge, what you need to do is you need to make sure, the prover has to make sure somehow, like imagine you're the prover now, right? You're getting this graph, and you want to be sure somehow that the verifier is generating this honestly. That is generating this according the way it's supposed to generate it, right? And it's not even sufficient to make sure that the h is isomorphic to one of G0 or G1, because the verifier may be generating the h in a way that it doesn't know whether it's isomorphic to G0 and G1, and it could learn it from you, the prover. So you have to make sure that the verifier knows the bit B, right? Because you are going to tell the verifier the bit B essentially, right? So at the end, the prover is going to give this B prime, which is supposed to be the bit B. And what you need to do is you need to make sure that the verifier already knows what you are going to tell it. Right? If you can ensure that, then that is zero knowledge, right? If you can make sure that you're not telling the verifier anything it doesn't already know, that's zero knowledge. Right? And the way you do it is, imagine what you do is you repeat this, you ask the verifier to give you not just one h, but like many different h's. And you can do something like, for most of them, you ask the verifier to tell you what the bit B is. And then it has to be correct, because you want to make sure that it knows the value of B for all of them. So you ask it to give you the value of the bit B for all except one of them maybe. And then for the remaining one, you tell it what the bit B is supposed to be. So this will sort of make sure if the verifier doesn't know the value of B for some of those copies, you will catch it. As the verifier, yeah. So you have to do a little bit more. You have to work a little bit more to handle this. You have to make sure it's random and all that. There's a bit more work you have to do, but this is the idea. The idea is you have to make sure that the verifier knows the bits. It picks these random bits and it knows what the bits are. Yeah. So the main thing here is you want to make sure that so ask the prover, what is the bad case for you? So if you look at this attack, right, what's happening here? Here the verifier is learning something about this graph h. What is it learning? It's learning whether the graph is isomorphic to G0 or not. And in fact, you can even strengthen this algorithm a little bit. You can say that if the h is not isomorphic to G0 or G1, I just won't even interact with you. You can do things like that. So the real problem is that the verifier might be learning from you whether the h is isomorphic to G0 or G1, whereas it's not supposed to be able to do that, where it did not know this already. So if the verifier behaves the way it's supposed to behave, then you as the prover are telling the verifier, okay, the graph you gave me is isomorphic to G0. The graph you gave me is isomorphic to G1. But when you do that, if the verifier followed the protocol, it already knew that information, right? Because this B tells, if the verifier generates h correctly, then it already knows that h is isomorphic to G0. It already knows that h is isomorphic to GB specifically, right? So it already knew that. In that case, it's okay to reveal this B prime to the verifier, right? So the bad case is when the verifier is giving you this h, but it does not know the B. So what you want to do is, when you get this h, you want to make sure somehow that the verifier in fact knows which of G0 or G1 it is isomorphic to. And so you do this by getting the verifier to send you many h's, and then you ask the verifier, you say, tell me the h1, first h you sent me, which one is it isomorphic to? The second you sent me is isomorphic to. You ask this for most of the h's, you will ask that. And for some of them, you will tell the verifier what you will execute this protocol on some of the h's essentially.
So is it somewhat related to if it is given oracle access to a graph isomorphism thing, then it can still fool the
So okay, the thing is, if it has access to a graph isomorphism oracle, then you can also simulate. If the simulator also has access to that, then you can simulate it. So that's fine.
When the prover asks h from the B from the verifier,
Mhm.
for all those
those cases, it should match the key that the prover outputs.
Mhm.
For all the cases, it should match, right?
Say this again for all the.
So for all the cases where you ask for this particular edge, you give me the key
Mhm.
to the verifier. In all the cases, the output of prover B prime should match that key given by the verifier.
Yeah. But in those cases, the prover won't even have to respond to that. So you sort of divide. You have many H's. You divide them into two sets. One of them that you use to test the verifier, and the other you use to run this protocol. Essentially. And
For all those cases, the prover will just check in itself whether it matches.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because the prover can do that.
So I didn't get what you're saying about repeating it. I mean, can't the verifier just use that particular protocol acting as a prover to prove that G B is isomorphic to?
Yeah, you could also do that. Yeah, but then okay, actually it can't do that because we are in the case where the G0 and G1 are not isomorphic. Because that's where you care about zero knowledge, right? So you can't quite do that.
No, I mean G.
Oh, I see. You want to show that H is isomorphic to one of them. Yeah, you could do that. Yeah.
Sending multiple edges and randomly connect which one is isomorphic and like verifier has to tell which one. So every time it has to tell, then it will sample the honest thing. And is it something like randomly it has to confirm to the prover that which is isomorphic?
Yeah, it will be random. Like you will pick randomly, you pick a few locations and say, okay, show me. Yeah, if it is known, then it won't work. Yeah. So it has to be more interactive. So first the verifier sends a bunch of H's, then the prover says, okay, in these locations, prove to me you know the thing, know the B's, and it'll pick those at random, and then you do the rest of it. Yeah, the prover will say, I won't interact with you anymore. So it will remain zero knowledge because the verifier has not learned anything so far. Yeah, that's the idea.
But we can still do some sort of like probability bounds, like let's say out of 5 places it samples 1 incorrectly and 4 correctly. There's still some probability that one particular thing is not asked.
Yeah, there is some things like that. Yeah, it won't be negligible. Like it's. Yeah, so you'll have some zero knowledge error in that case. It won't be perfectly zero knowledge. So it won't meet exactly this definition. You have to relax it a little bit. Yeah, relax it a little bit. But I don't want to go into that right now. But you'll have to relax it a little bit. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah, if you're interested, maybe I'll send Shruti a reference to this thing, and she can forward it to you. A better explanation of how you actually make it meet the definition. Yeah. So what we said just now is this protocol on its own, it doesn't match the stronger definition, doesn't meet the stronger definition. And by the way, the earlier definition where we only looked at the honest verifier protocol, it's called honest verifier zero knowledge, and this is the more general definition of zero knowledge. And in fact, this is actually not the most general one. This definition is called perfect zero knowledge. Perfect because we ask that the simulated distribution is the same as the distribution in the interactive protocol itself. Right? You can ask for this to be approximately equal, and that'll be an even weaker definition. But for now, we are only talking about this perfect zero knowledge over here. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Before we had only one V anyway. Yeah. So it could have also depended on the V because there is one V.
But that's honest. Right? So it doesn't matter.
Exactly. It doesn't matter. In this case, yeah, depending on the V star, it can be a different simulator. Which in fact we're going to see now, because this protocol actually does satisfy the definition on its own. This protocol does satisfy the perfect zero knowledge definition on its own, and we're going to see why it does. Yeah, so how are we going to do this? In general, it's harder to show the the more general zero knowledge property without the honest verifier bit, because you have to deal with these malicious verifiers V star that could be doing all sorts of arbitrary things. Like you don't know what it's going to do, and really and you have to deal with it somehow using by just observing the behavior of what it does, because it. So the simulator, as we observed just now, it can depend on the V star, right? All we want is for every V star there is some simulator algorithm. So it can depend on the V star, but it's very hard to use this power, because the V star is it can be like some algorithm, right? It's some program that is running. Like it's not clear how you can extract from that any meaning. So very often what we end up doing is we only use the behavior of the V star, as in the input output behavior of the V star. Like you can give it some input, see what the output is and do something based on it. We don't really have good techniques that can really look into the code of this V star and do something with that. And in fact, it may even turn out to be impossible to do that. But in general, typically in most cases what you'll see is that the most constructions of zero knowledge protocols, what you'll see is that the way you do the simulation is by using this V star as a black box. Like you only assume you have some input output access to it, and then you try to do something with that. Right? Because otherwise it's very hard to use any structure within V star to do things. Right? So that's what we're going to do here as well. So here we want to show that this protocol satisfies this stronger property, which means that for any possible V star here, any possible algorithm V star here, we want to design a simulator that can simulate its view. Right? And this protocol is convenient to work with for that, because here the verifier is very simple. Like it only sends one bit. Right? It doesn't do anything else. That's the only thing it does. So the range of behaviors the verifier can exhibit is a bit limited. Right? But we still have to do it. So how are we going to do it? So imagine you have some V star and you want to design a simulator for this V star, and you're given, and we are back in the graph isomorphism setting, right, where the prover is proving that the graphs are isomorphic. So you want your simulation to work in the case where the graphs are isomorphic, right? We're in that setting, and now you have the simulator which has access to, which it knows what it knows the program of V star. It can do whatever it wants. It can run it multiple times, whatever it can do, right? So then what are we going to do? How are we going to use our knowledge of V star to simulate the view of V star? How should we do this? Yeah, in particular it can do that because it has the code of V star, it can run it. So it has to, the important thing is it has to follow the distribution in the protocol. So let's think of the simplest thing we can attempt, right? Let's try to do what we were doing already over here. The only difference is now we have to do it in a different order, right? Here we were able to say, I pick a B, I pick an R, and I pick my H as R of GB, right? Now one complication over here is if the verifier behaved honestly, meaning if it sampled the bit B independently of the H, that would still work, right? Because we were using that property, and then this property is sufficient. Like even if this B was not being uniformly generated, you may be able to do something, as long as it's independent of the H. But the problem is a general V star may not behave this way. It may pick this B as a function of this H. And that's really the obstacle here. That's really what makes this difficult to do, right? So the question is, how do we do that? How do we deal with that? Because you cannot sample B first and then get H from it. Because the algorithm may be computing B from H in some complicated manner. So what could we do?
So we can sample an H, then query V star. I mean give H to V star, and wait till we get the particular B we want, and then R can be found out because we already know the B on which we found H, and that can be output as HBR.
Okay, something like this is going to work, and yeah.
We can sample a B ourselves. Let us name it B dash and generate a H using the previous thing. Now we give this H to the verifier and see what B it provides. If it same as the one we generated,
Mhm.
we go through, or else we fail the simulator.
Yeah, so these are the ideas basically. Like this is what we are going to do. Okay, so let's start. Let's start and see what it's going to look like. What we are going to do is, instead of doing it this way, we are going to try to honestly simulate this thing. Not fully honestly, but here's what we are going to do. Okay, so what we cannot simulate so far is the correlation between H and B, and that only comes from the verifier V star, and somehow we want to sort of meet that correlation. Like when we want to get the correlation from the V star, but still be able to do what we were doing over here, right? And so what we are going to do is we are going to start by doing the same kind of things. So we are going to say, let's say, I'm going to call it, I'm going to still call it the B. I'm going to do all of the same things. I'm going to sample R from the random relabeling and my H as R of GB. Okay. And now I'm going to see what the verifier V star is going to say. I'm going to call this B star, where I give the verifier this H. Okay, I give the V star this H, it outputs some B star, right? Now the nice thing is, if the B star is the same as the B that I have, I know how to complete this protocol, right? Because to complete this protocol, I just have to send the R, and that's exactly what the protocol itself would look like for that value of B, right? So if B star is equal to B, then I can output whatever I was outputting earlier. Because in fact, the real protocol looks like this when B star is equal to B, right? The problem is, if it is not equal to B, so if B star is equal to B, what is happening? So what have we done here, right? I started with GB, I started with one of the graphs, let's say I start with J0, and then I picked an R and got to H through that R, right? And now I know relabeling from G0 to H, and now I tell V, okay, here's the H. Now V is going to ask for a relabeling from either G0 or G1. If it asks for relabeling from the graph I already know, then I can respond with the relabeling because I know it. But if it asks for relabeling I don't know, then I cannot respond with it, right? So if it asks for something I do know, I will say, okay, this is what I saw, right? But if it's something I don't know, then there's nothing I can do, because I cannot find the isomorphism from G1 to H, right? The relabeling from G1 to H, I don't know how to find that because it's a hard problem. So what I do there is I just give up. I just say, okay, I cannot succeed. I'm going to fail here, right? And I'm allowed to do that as long as I don't do it with too high probability. I'm allowed to fail, right? And now to argue that this simulation works, that it meets the definition that we want, we need to argue two things. One, that it doesn't fail with high probability, that the probability it fails is small, and when it does not fail, it has the right distribution, right? And these two, let me erase some of this stuff. Yeah, so how do we argue these things? At least roughly, we don't have to go into too much detail. But how do I argue, for example, that the probability it fails is not too large? What is the probability that this will fail? Why is it half? Mhm. So this is true, but why is it true? Because the B star, it depends on the H, right? And the H can depend on the B, because H is a function of GB and this is a function of B. So there could be information about B in H, right?
So the malicious verifier is also all powerful. That would be very.
It's not all powerful.
It can. It still can't find out isomorphism, right?
Yeah, let's say it cannot find isomorphisms.
But then it can't find the B to which
Okay. So when we say it can't find isomorphisms, it means that there are some instances on which it cannot do it, at least some instances. But there could be instances on which it can do it, and you still want the simulation to work on that. Yeah.
Suppose there is an inherent bias in the H2B map in the verifier's choice of B. In that case, we can use that bias in our original B itself. So suppose now there is no like it is uniform, but it is dependent on H. So now since our choice of H is generated randomly, we get the same like we get the same probability of both B's in the like from the V star itself.
So actually, it's even simpler than that. The problem, as I was pointing out, is that there may be information about B in the H, right? But then remember that we are working with graphs that are isomorphic. So G0 and G1 are isomorphic. So in fact, there isn't any information about B in H, because irrespective of whether I pick B to be 0 or 1, the distribution of H is the same. So there's actually no information about B in H. So this V star, if it's just a function of H, this B star is going to be independent of the B, because H is independent of the B, right? That being the case, since your B is random, the probability B star is equal to B is a half, right? So the probability exactly a half you will fail because of this, and with the remaining probability you will output something, right? And as we argued earlier, if you do output this thing, then what you see here is exactly what you see in the protocol. So these two things put together will give you the two things that you want on that. I'm not arguing the second point in too much detail, but it's okay. It's yes, and that's important, right? Because you do want to simulate what's happening there. Okay, and this roughly, I haven't gone into some of the details, but roughly this proves that this protocol, as it is, actually satisfies a stronger definition of perfect zero knowledge against malicious verifiers as well, not just honest verifiers. Okay, then let's take a break now. I think it's time. Let's take half an hour and come back, and then we'll continue the last 1.5 hours. We'll talk about some computational relaxations of this definition, which are even weaker than this, and actually more useful because you can get them for a wider range of languages as well.